The galaxy was filled with whispers, jokes, and mocking smiles whenever the topic of humanity came up. Among the countless star systems, advanced empires had developed weapons that seemed like something out of pure imagination. Giant plasma, beams that could vaporize ships in seconds, rail cannons that fired slugs at near-light speed, and energy shields strong enough to turn entire fleets into untouchable fortresses. To them, war was a display of dazzling technology, an art shaped by science and brilliance. And then there were humans. When other civilizations looked at Earth's armies, they saw what they thought was laughable. Instead of sleek plasma weapons, humans carried projectile guns, loud, clunky things that spat pieces of metal using chemical explosions. Instead of silent energy lances, humans still fired bullets. Instead of perfect hovering war machines, they deployed tanks that rolled on. Treads, grinding the ground beneath them. Alien leaders in council chambers often ridiculed this. Humans cling to relics, one ambassador would say, as others chuckled. They are stuck in their past, still firing little pieces of metal while the galaxy has moved on. Another alien commander once mocked that a human rifle was nothing more than a child's firecracker compared to our weapons. Their laughter echoed in those grand halls, bouncing off polished crystal walls, feeding the arrogance of species that thought themselves superior. Even among younger alien soldiers, humans became the punchline to casual jokes. Training academies taught cadets that human guns were outdated, that their strategies were predictable, that their tools of war were primitive echoes of a violent heritage. Some cadets even carried wooden sticks, pretending they were human rifles, and laughed during their drills. To them, humans were a backwards people who refused to let go of their past. But the humans stayed quiet. On Earth, they did not respond to every insult hurled their way. They knew how the galaxy saw them. They knew that others measured strength only in glowing beams and futuristic designs. Yet, in silence, humans prepared. They trained their soldiers not just to use weapons, but to survive without them. They tested their tanks in mud, snow, sand, and rocky terrain where no hovercraft could last. Their guns were simple, but they worked everywhere, whether in the freezing cold of distant moons or the burning heat of desert worlds. The galaxy never noticed the way humans valued reliability over elegance, endurance over spectacle. While alien ships required entire factories to maintain their energy cores, humans could repair their weapons with nothing more than a wrench and spare parts. A plasma rifle might dazzle in demonstrations, but once its power cell ran dry, it became useless. A human rifle, on the other hand, could keep firing as long as the soldier had ammunition, and ammunition was something humans could produce in enormous quantities. Still, the laughter continued. There were debates in Interstellar, councils about allowing humans into major alliances. Many species argued against it, saying humanity was simply too underdeveloped. "They are reckless, dangerous only to themselves," one delegate sneered. "They think their ancient tools will win wars, but in truth, they are a people of the past, not the future." When these speeches were made, others in the chamber nodded, some smiling smugly, confident in their own superiority. What those species forgot, however, was history. Humanity's history was not filled with peaceful expansions and slow development. It was built on struggle, survival, and conflict. Every step of progress was fought for, every era of peace earned after hardship. Humans had endured wars, famines, disasters, and still kept moving forward. Their weapons, their strategies, their way of thinking, it all came from a history of necessity. And though the galaxy thought them weak, humans carried inside them a lesson no alien had yet learned: that sometimes the simplest tools in determined hands could be the deadliest of all. In the barracks on distant colonies, human soldiers listened to the rumors of alien mockery. Some laughed at the absurdity of it, while others shook their heads, knowing that one day the galaxy would see the truth. They trained harder, marched longer, and drilled with their rifles until they became extensions of their arms. Tanks were driven until engines roared like beasts, and artillery crews practiced until their shells landed with pinpoint accuracy. What aliens thought was primitive, humans called reliable. What aliens thought was outdated, humans knew was perfected. Behind the laughter, there was also fear. Not among the entire galaxy, but among a small handful of alien commanders who had studied humans more closely. They noticed how quickly humans adapted. They noticed that while other species built weapons to look perfect on battlefields, humans built them to win in the worst conditions. These commanders warned their councils, saying, "Do not underestimate Earth. Their weapons may look simple, but their people are not." Their warnings, however, were drowned in laughter and arrogance. There was one gathering in particular, remembered for years to come. In a shining council hall orbiting a star, the topic of human military capability was raised once again. Alien. Leaders stood tall in their ceremonial robes, pointing to images of human rifles, tanks, and artillery on glowing displays. One after another, they mocked. "Behold the humans and their toys!" one shouted, causing the hall to echo with amusement. Another compared a human bullet to a stone thrown by a caveman, and the crowd erupted in laughter. Far in the corner of that hall, a human representative sat quietly, listening. They did not respond with anger, nor with defense. They simply waited, their expression calm, as though they already knew a truth the galaxy had not yet realized. When the laughter died down, the representative stood and spoke just one line. "Mockery is easy. Survival is harder." Few in that hall paid attention. Most dismissed the words as meaningless. But those who did remember them would one day repeat them as prophecy. The mockery of humanity continued across colonies, trade hubs, and distant war fronts. Aliens considered humans nothing more than amusing participants in the greater stage of galactic politics. They were tolerated, sometimes ridiculed, but never respected. No one thought that these primitive weapons could ever stand against the advanced militaries of interstellar empires. But time has a way of revealing truth. For every laugh directed at humanity, there was a soldier drilling harder back on Earth. For every insult hurled in a council chamber, there was a tank being tested to survive yet another harsh condition. For every alien who called their weapons primitive, there was a human who knew that history had given them something more valuable than technology: resilience. The galaxy believed humanity's guns were a weakness. They were wrong. What they could not see, not yet, was that those very weapons were symbols of something far greater. They represented human determination, human adaptability, and the refusal to break even in the face of overwhelming odds. And though the galaxy laughed, now the day would come when the sound of that laughter would be replaced by silence, followed by fear. The galaxy's laughter was still fresh when the first real test arrived. For years, humans had listened to the mocking voices of alien leaders, the ridicule of soldiers from distant stars, the dismissive smirks of commanders who believed Earth was little more than an amusing footnote in galactic history. But history has a way of testing the truth, and on one quiet border world, that test finally came. It began not with a declaration of war, but with a raid. A powerful alien empire, one of the oldest and most advanced, had been expanding steadily into nearby systems. Their fleets were massive, their ships glowing with the light of advanced weapons, their warriors armored in shining alloys. To them, this was not war. It was simply another easy conquest, a routine operation. They had done it countless times before. Why should this time be any different? The target was a small human colony settled on a cold, rocky planet at the edge of known space. The settlement wasn't impressive. Wooden structures mixed with metal prefabs, farmland scattered across frozen soil, smoke curling from chimneys where colonists warmed themselves against the bitter chill. It was a young colony, barely a generation old, still struggling to turn a harsh world into a livable home. To the alien raiders, it looked weak, vulnerable, easy prey. Their ships descended like shadows, engines roaring as they pierced the sky. Colonists scattered in alarm, children clinging to their parents, alarms blaring through the settlement. The aliens expected surrender, panic, and chaos. They expected the humans to raise their hands and beg for mercy, as so many other species had done before them. But instead, they met something different. When the first alien soldiers marched into the colony, their armor glowing faintly with shield energy, they saw humans standing in the snow with rifles slung over their shoulders. The weapons looked small compared to the plasma carbines carried by the invaders, and the alien commander sneered behind his mask. He raised his voice through a translator, mocking them loudly for all to hear. "You face the weapons of the future," he declared. "Do you really think your little toys can stop us?" The humans did not answer. They simply raised their rifles. The first shot cracked like thunder, sharp and violent, echoing through the frozen valley. The bullet slammed into the chest plate of the alien commander. His shield flickered once, then shattered. The next shot tore through his armor, dropping him into the snow with a stunned expression frozen on his face. For the first time, the aliens stopped laughing. The skirmish erupted instantly. Aliens fired plasma bolts that hissed through the air, glowing streaks of light that melted snow and scorched walls. But the humans moved fast, darting between cover, firing in controlled bursts. Their rifles barked with relentless rhythm, sending streams of metal projectiles that cut through armor, pierced weak points, and shattered shields designed for energy weapons but not for kinetic impact. The invaders had never faced weapons like these. Their shields, perfect against plasma and lasers, were useless against simple, fast-moving bullets. The slugs tore into them, unstoppable, breaking their formations and leaving them scrambling for cover. Their heavy armor, built to deflect energy beams, cracked under concentrated fire. Panic spread as soldiers fell one by one. The colony defenders fought with precision. They knew their weapons, trusted them. Bullets slammed into fuel lines on enemy vehicles, turning sleek hovercraft into burning wrecks. Artillery, hidden in the hills, launched shells that rained down with thunderous force, tearing apart landing sites and scattering alien troops. The air filled with smoke, fire, and the echo of gunfire. For the aliens, it was supposed to be an easy raid, but now it was chaos. One group of alien soldiers tried to regroup and push through, but a single human tank rolled into the field, treads grinding over frozen ground. Its cannon fired once, a deafening boom that shook the valley, and an enemy. Transport exploded in flames. The sight stunned the invaders. How could something so outdated, so primitive, be so devastating? The humans pressed forward. They did not fight with fear. They fought with purpose, with history in their blood. Each shot carried the weight of centuries of struggle, each movement shaped by generations that had survived wars beyond imagining. They had no plasma beams, no glowing shields, no elegant armor, but what they had worked. And it worked better than anyone in the galaxy had ever believed. The skirmish lasted only hours, but to the aliens, it felt like days. Their retreat was disorganized, filled with shouts and panic as human fire forced them back to their ships. Wounded soldiers stumbled, commanders shouted in disbelief, and pilots scrambled to lift off before more shells struck their landing zones. Smoke trailed into the sky as engines roared, ships lifting away, leaving behind burning wreckage and shattered pride. When silence finally fell, the humans stood among the ruins, breathing heavily, rifles still warm in their hands. Snow melted. In dark pools where plasma fire had scorched the ground, smoke curled into the sky from destroyed vehicles. The colony was scarred, buildings damaged, fields burned. But the people were still standing. The aliens had expected weakness. Instead, they found defiance. News of the battle spread quickly across the galaxy. At first, many did not believe it. How could a colony with rifles and tanks repel one of the most advanced raiding forces in the quadrant? But the evidence was undeniable. Images leaked, burning alien vehicles, shattered shields, fallen soldiers struck down not by plasma beams, but by simple bullets. The galaxy that had once laughed at humanity suddenly grew quiet. In council chambers, where humans had been mocked, silence fell as representatives read the reports. In military academies, instructors who once ridiculed human rifles now stared at footage of shields failing under streams of projectiles. Commanders who had once joined the laughter now whispered to each other, wondering what this meant for future wars. For the first time, the galaxy realized that what they had dismissed as primitive was not weakness. It was strength. The humans did not celebrate with arrogance. There were no great parades, no speeches filled with triumph. They mourned their dead, repaired their colony, and prepared for what they knew would come next. The skirmish was only the beginning. The empire they had fought would not forgive such humiliation. Larger fleets would come, stronger armies would descend, determined to crush the defiant species that had dared to resist. But the humans were ready. Every soldier who stood in the snow that day carried the memory of what had happened. They had seen alien shields shatter under their bullets. They had seen towering war machines crumble under artillery fire. They had seen fear in the eyes of those who once mocked them. And they knew that history was shifting. The first skirmish was not just a battle, it was a message, a warning to the galaxy. Humanity was not a relic of the past. Humanity was not a joke to be laughed at. Humanity was a force, determined, relentless, and armed with weapons that the galaxy had never truly understood. And though the war was far from over, the echoes of that first skirmish carried far and wide, whispering into the halls of power and across the stars. The laughter had begun to fade, replaced by something else, something far more dangerous. Respect. The galaxy did not understand humans, not truly. They thought they did. To them, humanity was a small species from a small world, armed with primitive technology and strange, outdated traditions. They mocked Earth's weapons, laughed at its history, and rolled their eyes at its stubbornness. But after the first skirmish, the laughter had grown faint. It was replaced by something else: curiosity, unease, and in some corners, fear. What had happened on that frozen colony should have been impossible. An empire with fleets of shining ships and weapons that could melt steel had been driven back by rifles, tanks, and artillery that belonged to a different age. The aliens could not explain it. Their scientists examined battlefield recordings again and again. Their generals studied the shattered remains of shields, the holes torn into armor, the burned wreckage of vehicles. Still, the answer slipped through their fingers. They were looking in the wrong place. The truth was never just about the weapons. It was about the people who used them. Humanity's hidden advantage was not just in steel and powder, but in the way they thought, the way they fought, and the history they carried inside them. While other species built weapons for clean, predictable wars, humans had spent thousands of years surviving the ugliest conflicts imaginable. They had fought in forests and deserts, in frozen wastelands and swamps, in ruined cities where shadows hid snipers and every building might explode. They had endured wars where resources were scarce, where nothing came easy, where improvisation meant survival. It had shaped them into something the galaxy didn't recognize. When the alien empire returned to study humanity, they expected to see confusion, disorganization, and outdated tactics. Instead, they saw something unsettling: humans adapting faster than they could measure. The colony that had survived the raid was already rebuilding, New trenches lined the hills, hidden bunkers spread underground, supply routes strengthened. Through rugged terrain, and in workshops filled with grease and sweat, engineers were modifying weapons, making them deadlier, faster, and harder to predict. No one had told them to do it. No central command had issued orders. It was simply how humans worked. When they faced a threat, they learned. They changed. They prepared. That was the hidden advantage. The Empire's soldiers, meanwhile, were trained for structure and routine. Their weapons were powerful, yes, but they were designed for wars where the enemy folded quickly, where battles ended before they truly began. Their armor and shields were perfect against the expected. Energy beams, plasma bolts, neat formations of soldiers fighting by the book. But against humans, against their constant adjustments, their chaotic creativity, their refusal to fight the proper way. Those advantages fell apart. Reports began to spread across the galaxy. Scouts whispered about human colonies building traps that lured raiders into ambushes. Pirates who once laughed at projectile weapons now told hushed stories of ships crippled by railgun fire, their shields shattered by simple tungsten slugs. Even mercenaries, hardened and fearless, refused jobs that involved human territory. Still, many leaders dismissed it. They were lucky, they said. That first battle was a fluke. But deep down, unease lingered. Because the more they studied, the more they realized luck had very little to do with it. Humans had something the galaxy had forgotten. One example came from another colony, weeks after the first battle. An alien strike force landed with overwhelming numbers, determined to prove the earlier defeat had been a mistake. They came with heavy armor, shield generators, and walking mechs designed to terrify enemies into surrender. They expected fear, but what they met was silence. The colony seemed empty when they landed. Houses abandoned, streets quiet, no soldiers in sight. The aliens spread out, searching, laughing at the thought that the humans had fled. Then the ground shook. Buried mines, homemade but deadly, erupted beneath their vehicles. Hidden snipers fired from rooftops, their bullets punching through weak points in armor. Smoke filled the streets, confusion spread, and suddenly every alley, every corner, every shadow was alive with human resistance. It was not neat. It was not elegant. But it was devastating. The aliens withdrew again, leaving behind smoking wrecks and broken pride. And across the stars, the whispers grew louder. The hidden advantage wasn't just in weapons. It was in mindset. Where others saw chaos, humans saw opportunity. Where others saw limits, humans saw possibilities. Even in their technology, what looked primitive to outsiders was, in truth, frighteningly efficient. A rifle was not elegant, but it was simple, reliable, easy to repair in the field. Ammunition could be made in hidden factories, smuggled in crates, carried on the backs of soldiers. A plasma rifle might burn brighter, but when its power cell failed, it became little more than scrap. A human weapon, on the other hand, could keep firing as long as there was powder and metal. The galaxy had forgotten the value of such things. Humans never had. The more aliens studied, the more they saw how history had prepared humans for this moment. Every century of war, every struggle on Earth, every conflict where survival was uncertain, it had all built a foundation. It gave them instincts that no training program could reproduce, a stubbornness that no enemy could easily break, and perhaps most frightening of all, it gave them unity. On Earth, humans had often fought each other. But when the galaxy mocked them, when empires tried to crush them, when outsiders looked down on them, something shifted. Borders mattered less. Old rivalries faded. Colonists, soldiers, engineers, farmers, they stood together. The galaxy had given them a reason to unite. And united humans were not to be underestimated. One alien scholar, watching all of this unfold, wrote quietly in his records, We thought their weakness was in their simplicity, but perhaps their simplicity is the very thing that makes them strong. The hidden advantage was not obvious at first glance. You couldn't see it in their weapons lined up on a rack or in their modest ships orbiting a world. You couldn't measure it in laboratories or replicate it in simulations. The hidden advantage was inside them, in the way they thought, the way they endured, the way they refused to surrender no matter how many times they were struck down. That was what terrified the galaxy most, because weapons could be copied, technology could be stolen, shields could be upgraded. But the will to fight, the creativity to turn weakness into strength, that could not be manufactured. And so, as the galaxy whispered about humans and their strange success, a shadow of fear began to grow. What if the first skirmish had only been the beginning? What if the hidden advantage that humans carried was not just enough to survive, but enough to win? The empires that had once mocked them now hesitated. The leaders who had laughed now sat in silence. They wondered how far humanity would go, how much of that old history they carried, how much strength still waited to be revealed. The hidden advantage had been discovered, and the galaxy would never look at humans the same way again. The galaxy had underestimated humans for too long. At first, their laughter had echoed through council chambers and war rooms, mocking the species from a small blue planet. Even after the first skirmishes, many rulers dismissed the victories as coincidence, nothing more than lucky shots or tactical errors. But slowly, steadily, the tone began to change. Whispers spread from one world to another. Fleets that once mocked human colonies now approached with hesitation. Soldiers trained for swift conquests spoke of Earth with unease. The galaxy, for the first time in centuries, felt uncertainty. And then came the turning point. It began not with a grand declaration, but with silence. A stretch of space once alive with trade and raiding suddenly went quiet. Reports from scouts vanished. Communication relays stopped responding. It was as if the stars themselves had gone mute. When the Empire finally sent a fleet to investigate, expecting resistance, but nothing too dangerous, what they found shook them to their core. The humans had changed. Where once they had been scattered, defensive, and unprepared, now they stood organized, united, and ready. Colonies no longer waited passively for attacks. They had fortified, built new fleets, and adapted their weapons to fight not just on the ground but in space. Improvised warships, armored with repurposed hulls and bristling with railguns and missile batteries, now patrolled the dark. These ships were crude compared to the sleek designs of the Empire, but they worked. The fleet that entered human-controlled space expected an easy victory. Instead, they walked into a trap. The battle was unlike anything the galaxy had seen in generations. The Empire had numbers, firepower, and experience. But the humans had something else, the element of unpredictability. They fought with patience, allowing the Empire to press deeper, believing they held the advantage. And then, at the perfect moment, the humans struck. Missiles launched from hidden stations. Railguns fired from asteroids disguised as debris. Small, fast ships darted between massive cruisers, striking weak points and vanishing before counterfire could land. The Empire's neat formations crumbled under the weight of chaos. The turning point was not just in the weapons, though. It was in the will of the fighters. Every human ship fought as if there was no retreat, no surrender. Every soldier on the ground acted as if the survival of their people depended on their courage. And perhaps it did. Where other species relied on discipline drilled into them by training programs, humans drew on something older, deeper, the instinct to survive, the fire of determination, the refusal to give in no matter how dark the night became. The Empire, used to swift victories, did not know how to respond. Their soldiers, unprepared for prolonged resistance, began to falter. Officers shouted orders that no longer made sense in the chaos of battle. Ships that had never known defeat now found themselves crippled, limping back to safe space. When the battle ended, it was clear to all who watched. The balance had shifted. The turning point had come. Humanity was no longer seen as prey. They were no longer underestimated, no longer dismissed. They had become a force the galaxy would have to reckon with. But what made this moment truly significant was not just the victory. It was the message it sent. The humans had shown that they could adapt, endure, and rise against odds that should have crushed them, and in doing so, they sparked something even greater. Across the galaxy, others who had suffered under the weight of empires began to take notice. Species who had lived in fear for centuries started whispering about the humans. If this small, underestimated species could stand and fight, perhaps they too could rise. The turning point was not just military, it was psychological. It reshaped the way the galaxy thought, the way it measured strength. For the first time in living memory, the great empires felt doubt, and humans, they did not celebrate with grand parades or triumphant speeches. They simply worked harder. Engineers tore apart captured ships, learning how alien technology functioned, finding weaknesses and adapting them for human use. Farmers turned their fields into supply depots, ensuring soldiers never went hungry. Colonists, once ordinary settlers, became the backbone of a resistance that no empire could easily crush. Every victory fueled their determination. Every loss only strengthened their resolve. And slowly, one battle at a time, the humans pushed the galaxy toward a future no one had expected. The turning point also revealed something deeper: the unity of humanity. On Earth, history had been filled with conflict, divisions, and rivalries. But in the face of an outside threat, something shifted. Borders blurred, differences faded, and for the first time in centuries, humans acted not as separate nations, but as one people. This unity gave them strength that no empire could fully understand. While alien empires were often divided by politics, pride and old grudges, humanity showed a rare focus. They had no illusions of being the strongest or the most advanced. They knew their place in the galaxy was fragile, and that very knowledge gave them the determination to defend it at any cost. For the galaxy, the turning point was a warning. What had once been dismissed as a primitive species was now a threat. What had once been ridiculed as weak was now respected and feared. Leaders who once joked about Earth now spoke cautiously of it in council halls. Generals who once ignored humanity now studied their battles with unease, and those who had thought of conquering them began to reconsider. The galaxy had laughed, it had mocked, it had doubted, but after the turning point, no one laughed anymore. Yet the two humans had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. The galaxy had changed forever. The battles were over, but the echoes of human defiance continued to ripple across the stars. Humanity had shown what it meant to fight, to endure, and to rise when all odds seemed against them. Where other civilizations had relied on fleets, shields, and inherited power, humans had relied on something older, something more primal, a fire that burned in every heart, a determination that no weapon could destroy. The legacy of human fire was not just in the victories themselves, it was in the courage that carried through generations, in the stories passed down from one colonist to the next, in the lessons learned through hardship and survival. The galaxy remembered the rifles, the tanks, the makeshift ships, but it was the humans behind them that left a mark no enemy could erase. Colonies that had once been overlooked now stood as symbols of resistance. Planets scattered across star. Systems bore the scars of conflict, but also the signs of resilience. Barricades had been rebuilt stronger, weapons adapted, supply lines made more secure. Engineers and soldiers worked together seamlessly, improvising solutions that no alien technology could anticipate. The galaxy watched, unsure how such a species, small and seemingly fragile, could have transformed into a legend. This transformation was the essence of the human legacy. The fire was not just in weaponry, it was in mindset. It was the refusal to accept defeat, the creativity to turn weakness into advantage, and the unity to stand together when every other species might have crumbled. Humans had rewritten the rules of survival and combat in the galaxy, leaving an impression that would endure for centuries. Alien leaders convened in secret, reviewing reports of what had transpired. Entire fleets had been halted, invasions repelled, and colonies defended, not by superior technology, but by strategy, courage, and a relentless will. They had underestimated humans, thinking that they could be easily outmatched and outsmarted. Now, they saw the consequences of that miscalculation. Even species who had never met a human began to feel the ripple of fear and respect. Traders whispered of human colonies with improvised defenses that could turn the tide of battle. Scientists studied their weapons. Engineers puzzled over the simplicity and reliability of human ingenuity. The galaxy had laughed once, but now it paused, thinking twice before challenging this extraordinary species. The legacy of human fire was visible in every engagement that followed. Skirmishes that once promised easy victory became stalemates. Alien forces found themselves outmaneuvered, trapped in tactics they could not predict. Human soldiers moved with coordination, precision, and creativity, born of centuries of struggle. Every battle was a lesson learned, every encounter an opportunity to grow stronger. But the legacy went beyond combat. The fire of humanity inspired others. Civilizations that had lived in fear of conquest began to find courage in the stories of human resistance. Colonies that had long been subjugated dreamed of freedom, seeing proof that determination could triumph over seemingly insurmountable odds. The courage of a few had sparked the hope of many, and the galaxy was never the same again. Back on Earth, humanity's leaders did not revel in fame or glory. They understood that legacy was not built in a single moment, nor measured by the battles won. It was built in every act of perseverance, every innovation forged in necessity, and every person willing to stand when others might have fled. Humans celebrated quietly, knowing that the real work had only begun. Every colonist, soldier, and engineer became a custodian of that legacy. They taught the next generation to understand that fire was not just about weapons or technology, it was about spirit. It was the ability to think differently, adapt faster, and endure longer than any opponent expected. They passed down stories of courage and cleverness, of battles where courage overcame fear and determination overcame might. The galaxy took notice. Tales of human victories were studied not just as military engagements, but as lessons in strategy, psychology, and leadership. Commanders of alien fleets began to respect humans, even those who had once sought to destroy them. Humans had rewritten the definition of strength. It was no longer simply the size of fleets or the power of weapons. It was the endurance, creativity, and resolve of those wielding them. In systems far from Earth, human colonies became training, grounds for resilience. Children learned early that survival required ingenuity, that courage could tip the scales, and that even a single determined individual could make a difference. Humanity's legacy was teaching the galaxy that hope was not a weakness, but a force more potent than many anticipated. The fire burned brightest, not in the victories themselves, but in the moments between them. During long nights on distant colonies, when resources ran low and the weight of the galaxy's expectations pressed down, humans kept moving forward. They repaired ships with makeshift parts, scavenged weapons from battlefields, and improvised strategies when plans failed. Their determination, unseen yet unwavering, became a hallmark of their species. Alien scholars wrote treatises on the human phenomenon, analyzing why a seemingly small and primitive species had so profoundly altered the balance of power. Histories were rewritten, new strategies developed, and alliances reconsidered. The galaxy learned that humans were unpredictable, relentless, and above all, enduring. No technology alone could match a species whose heart and mind refused to surrender. The legacy of human fire was also a warning. Empires that had once laughed at Earth now understood that underestimating humans was a grave mistake. To engage them without respect or preparation was to court disaster. Humans had demonstrated that they could absorb punishment, adapt rapidly, and fight back with cunning and courage that defied expectation. Even in the quiet aftermath of war, humans did not rest. They rebuilt, they planned, they trained. The fire was never extinguished. It burned in the hearts of every colonist, every soldier, every citizen who believed in their shared future. They understood that legacy was living, evolving, and enduring. Centuries later, historians would look back and mark this era as the moment humanity reshaped the galaxy, not through conquest alone, but through the indomitable fire of spirit, the resilience of its people, and the courage to stand when no one else believed they could. They had proven that strength was not measured by weaponry alone, but by the will to endure, the mind to innovate, and the heart to persist. And so, the legacy of human fire endured. It inspired generations, humbled enemies, emboldened allies, and reminded the galaxy that even the smallest species, when driven by courage and unity, could become a force that could never be ignored. Humanity's story was no longer one of survival, alone. It was a story of inspiration, of hope, and of a fire that refused to be quenched. The galaxy had seen it, and it would remember it forever.